Thank you, Karen. I am very excited to be able to talk with all of you this evening as you're likely getting started or have put some work in already on the Chapter Progress Report form for 2017. We are going to talk specifically, I'll just move right to the objectives of our talk. First of all, I want to start with what the purpose is. Why are you doing all this work on the Chapter Progress Report form? What does it mean to your chapter, and what does it mean to the fraternity as a whole? I think it's always important that we understand the why. Why are we doing this when we're putting in a lot of effort to gather information within a chapter? We're going to specifically talk about the eligibility criteria for chapter award recognition, which is part of the role that this form plays. I don't want you to do the work and not be able to be recognized for it. And we'll spend most of our time talking about different tools, frequently asked questions, helpful hints to help you get through the form and reduce the issues that we have to have after submission, going back and forth trying to correct information. We're going to start with a question, and we're curious to know whether or not the group has participated in completing the Chapter Progress Report form within their chapter in the past. Trying to get an idea here on continuity. Okay, so it looks like we have about 70% of you who are here learning about this for the, from the first time. Hold on a second here. There we go. I hope everyone's seeing the right thing. It just was strange on my screen. It looks like we have about 70% of people who have not worked on this form in the past, but 30% have. So that is extremely reassuring. You 30% who have, that is an excellent means of being able to get information communicated over time. That longitudinal involvement of at least somebody who's done this before and understands the process is extremely important. This is what I like to think of chapters looking like when they are filling out their form. Ideally, I feel like it should be a group of people, whether or not that's your executive committee, another group of brothers that are working together and obviously strategizing here, setting goals, sort of the perfect scenario from my standpoint of what the purpose of this form is. However, I think oftentimes the chapters are waiting for the big announcement at GCC of who, or in the mask on an off GCC year, who is in the top 10 chapters and who is that top chapter of the year in our fraternity. And then you get to get your picture taken with me or whoever is handing out the awards and announcing these things and bring that back to your chapter and everybody's happy. And since GCC is this year and it's in Florida, I'll have a shameless plug that I think we should definitely take advantage of the birthplace of Gatorade, and some GCCs should be celebrated when their chapters bring home the awards. So keep that in mind, and we'll have to talk to Robert, Brother Mancini, and see if he can hook us up with some large Gatorade to really celebrate this in high fashion. But in all seriousness, I really want you to think about why you're taking the time to fill out the form. And I think oftentimes brothers and chapters get really caught up in getting every point they can on that form, which I'm okay with when you're looking and wanting to achieve things within those points. But I think it's far more important that this form be used internally within the chapter to be able to help identify where strengths are, what areas are you really strong in, doing very well, a lot of different activities in that area, or keeping up with meetings, keeping on board with your GCD. And then also identifying those sections or items that are perhaps weaker areas. And use that for goal setting when your next executive committee comes in or when your committees start working, using some of those items that you haven't gained points on before, going through them and thinking, is this an activity that is in the vision of our chapter? Does this make sense for the direction we want to go? How hard would it be for us to add this activity? Or would you like to lean in a different direction and add an activity that maybe isn't recognized on the form but means more to your community, your school, or your chapter? So I think that those assessments need to be taking place, and this form really serves as a good model or a good guide for that, as it really operates within the ideals of Kappa Psi on the whole. So really, I want the primary goal of this to be helping growth in your chapter. However, it is also the tool used to identify top performing chapters by recognition from the fraternity, and as I mentioned, that's either announced in the MASC on an off GCC year or at GCC during the scholarship luncheon. So we have our second poll question, and this question is, I have seen or have access to last year's chapter progress report form submission from my chapter. Excellent. This is very reassuring. This is exactly what I want to see, 76% saying yes and only 24% saying no. However, that is still a quarter of our chapters that don't have access to the previous year's form, which is really what we want to be using it for. Remember that growth, comparing what did we do last year, what goals did we set, did we meet those goals as reflected on this form, or goals that were outside of that form. Every year I have chapters that are contacting me asking if I have a copy because they can't get in touch with whoever was responsible for the form the year before. I think it's really important to make sure that that remains a chapter document and isn't just stuck on someone's laptop that may be on rotation or away from you or out of communication where you can't access that important information to be successful in completing the form. Okay. So first of all, you need to know where to find the form, and you can find the form in the handout section of this webinar, the Chapter Progress Report form. But when you go back to your chapter, if you don't have a copy of the form already, you would go to kappapsi.org and the Central Office tab, and then under Forms and Chapter Forms, you will find all of the documents you need for this process. And for the remainder of this talk, after the next slide, we're going to be specifically looking at different sections of this form, and so it may be worthwhile for you to have that up on another screen or perhaps a printout of it or something. I will have several screenshots during this presentation, but depending on what questions we get, we may be skipping around to different sections, and it just might be a good idea to have a copy beside you. So when you go to that section of the website, you scroll down and you'll find this area here. And these 4 items specifically, you're going to need. Starting with the Chapter Progress Report form letter, this is going to specifically be an instruction document. The second document is the actual form, the Excel file, the Chapter Progress Report form. That might be handy for you to have here during this webinar. And then there's a Dean and GCD evaluation. I have screenshots of both of those. Don't worry if you're trying to get things up on a different computer or tablet, don't worry about those. The Chapter Progress Report form will be where we're spending the majority of our time during this talk. So you're going to need all of those documents to be successful in this process. So if we start with the Chapter Progress Report form letter, and this is also included in the handouts, it specifically talks about that purpose of the form, which I've already discussed with you. I firmly believe it's really about building your chapter and not just getting points so that you can be recognized as a top performing chapter. It also states the eligibility criteria to make sure that you're able to be recognized for that work that you've done. It shares the important deadlines which have been consistent over time. There's an early bird bonus deadline of April 15th. If you've submitted your progress report form by that time, you get an extra 100 points. And then May 15th is the final deadline for submission, and there's no late exceptions. It's May 15th, midnight, local time, that's it. It also goes through several instructions that are also on the Chapter Progress Report form. So there are 2 separate places where you can get instructions, and now 3 in addition to this webinar. We will talk about the instructions here as well. First of all, I want to spend some time on the eligibility criteria. This has been a big issue over the last year. I found this cartoon, which made me think that it actually made me laugh because I have run a marathon before, twice, and I understand if I were to be disqualified after doing all that work, it would be very devastating. And unfortunately, we had several chapters last year that submitted everything, completed everything, verified out, performed very well, but were deemed ineligible because they did not meet the criteria of eligibility. And this specifically talks about wanting to know that the rules were clearly stated before you entered, and I just want to reiterate, the rules are clearly stated. There's nothing secret to this. You should be able to determine whether you are eligible or not, or you would have the tools to find that out. And I'm going to give you some hints on what you should do to make sure you do not get disqualified because of eligibility issues. So eligibility, your chapter must have been charted before June 1st, 2016, which is essentially the first day of this reporting period that we will capture on the form. June 1st, 2016 through May 31st, 2017 will be the reporting period, and I'll show you where it says that on the form. It is still important, I feel, for chapters that have been chartered after that time to start working with the form. Even though I don't need it submitted to me, it's a good idea for you to start practicing on that form and seeing what's there. It can help you build your chapter and determine what activities or items may be important moving forward for building a strong chapter. The two most important things that will end up disqualifying someone, first being you have got to be paid up with the central office. If you owe money for dues, new member initiation fees, etc., you will be disqualified. So as of May 31st, 2017, I will call the central office and they will give me a list of anyone that does not have a zero balance, and those people will be ineligible. You can circumvent this by calling the central office or emailing the central office to confirm that if you think you have a zero balance, the central office also has you as a zero balance. It is not uncommon. For example, there are two situations that seem to be most common. One, your February 15th roster comes out with your dues assessment, and the central office has 30 brothers. And you have only 21 brothers, or you have 46 brothers, and there is a discrepancy there. So you're only paying for the 21 brothers, but the central office has billed you for 30, and so even though you think that you've paid your dues for your brothers, there's still a gap in what the balance is. And you just send what you think you owe and don't talk to the central office about how to make it right. That's where we end up with these discrepancies. So first of all, if your roster's off on February 15th, you need to communicate with the central office to figure out if graduates weren't submitted or if new member cards weren't processed or weren't submitted, to make sure your numbers are matching with how many active brothers you're being assessed on. Second thing that happens is new initiates. So spring pledging, people get initiated. Those new initiate fees are either sent in late or not paid, and or forgotten about completely, which has happened inadvertently to some chapters. So those are the two big ticket items that will be missed that will result in ineligibility in that area. So really take care of the time, take care of those issues with the central office. Take the time to actually talk to them, communicate them by phone or email. You also have to be up on filing your taxes. So every year we have to file our taxes, and when that happens really is dependent on the chapter and certain dates and things related. So it's very specific. There's not a date for all chapters. So we just say you must be up to date in your filing, which generally means you must have filed the 990 tax form within the last year. If you have no idea what this is or you need assistance, the go-to person for that is the Grand Counselor, Brother Christy Askew at this time would be your go-to person if you have questions about whether or not your tax form has been submitted or you don't know what to do about that. Please take the time. Again, I will contact her May 31st, and she will give me a list of who's okay and who's not okay. All right, so now that you're all going to be eligible, I want to know who is actually filling this form out in your chapter. So please tell me who is responsible for this in your chapter, whether it's 1, the regent, 2, your GCD, 3, a chapter committee that specifically works on chapter awards or the progress report form, 4, another brother or set of brothers that's tasked with this, or 5, who is the Wizard of Oz. You have absolutely no idea who has managed this form in the past for your chapter. Okay, so it looks like we have mostly the regent, another officer, or the chapter executive committee is primarily involved in filling out this form. We have a few chapters that have a separate committee. I think that's a great idea. Or another brother that's just trying to salvage the operation here is a very minimal number. No Wizard of Oz, at least you know, you have some idea who's responsible for this in your chapter, so that's extremely reassuring to me that there's some information being passed one way to the next. So we are going, I'm sorry, whenever those poll questions go, there we go, we're back. Okay, so now getting started with the form. When we open up the form, you're going to see an instruction section, and I think it's actually going to show up in the next slide a little bit better. But first of all, let's talk about what is the evaluation period. This you'll see in the instructions when I show the front page. I mentioned what the evaluation period dates were. It talks about generally including the entire academic year, and you'll see that the period goes all the way through May 31st, 2017, but the final deadline is May 15th, 2017. So what happens to those weeks in between? And you are allowed to take points for any activities that are going to be happening or scheduled between May 15th and May 31st in good faith that those will be completed. I definitely have chapters that have things come up, maybe an election or something where they end up with a new officer, or someone's decided to travel to a province meeting in another province maybe that they didn't know of before. You can definitely contact me and we can make adjustments that way. They might have a newsletter that's pending. It's going to be released before May 31st, but not by May 15th. So there's a lot of different reasons. And really, you know, we are taught in Kappa Psi, we trust our brothers. So if you have something scheduled, I'm more than happy for you to take those points. And I do have chapters that contact me every year and say, you know what, we're going to do that, but we didn't, so you can take those points away too. So it has been a very honest and forthcoming process, and we're going to keep it that way. I may query you and say, hey, you told me you were going to have a newsletter coming. I need a copy of that. That's part of the verification process. So let's look at the front page of this form. So when you open up the form, you're going to see Kappa Psi Chapter Progress Report Form 2017. Very important. These forms look very similar year to year. Do not take the electronic copy from last year that says 2016 and just adjust that one. There are minor changes made each year that make the lines different. So when I do the data collation, if it is not on the right form, you will get it back and have to put it on the right form because it just won't go into my database. And I'm not going to retype your whole form into that. So make sure that you're actually operating on the 2017 form. Well, when you start anything, you want to start at the top. And this section is extremely important. You're going to select your chapter and select your province. Believe it or not, I cannot look at this and know whose chapter it belongs to. So there are drop-down menus, and you should be able to find yourself on there. If you can't, there is an other in each of those, but you should be able to find yourself. Very important, this contact person, phone number, and email. That needs to be filled out with someone that's going to be responsible and timely in answering, because this is the person I'm going to be contacting if we have verification issues. For instance, you've taken points for submitting the history form, and the Grand Historian does not have you on the list of chapters that have submitted that. I am going to query back to you and say, hey, the historian doesn't have you on their list. Can you show me some proof or tell me what happened when you submitted this form? Show me what you've done, why you took those points. Generally, I need to hear back within a couple of days, and I'll put specifically on the email when I need to hear back by. And it's really unfortunate when that contact person is overseas on a rotation or something, and it becomes a lot of stress for them to try to figure out what might be happening back at home. So make sure that that person is able to be reached for sure between May 15th and July 1st, which is when the majority of the verification and communication from myself or the other members of the Chapter Awards Committee is going to be taking place back with your chapter to verify those points and ensure we have all the correct information on the forms. Okay. Now, on the bottom of that form, there's the Chapter Progress Report Form tab on the left. That's the tab that opens up that you're looking at. You will see in the instructions through in the blue on your screen here that there is a sheet 2, and there'll be several items through the form that ask you to put something on sheet 2. List brothers on sheet 2. I'm going to show you in a minute with my next clip what when you click on that bottom tab, what sheet 2 will look like, but I want to bring your attention back up to those form instructions and information on the top of this slide. You can see there clearly the eligibility criteria are listed, and there's some additional instructions. The form has drop-down boxes. If the box does not have the point value that you're looking for, it may be an error in the box. Please email me and I'd be more than happy to look. But it may be that somehow there's a calculation that's off, that the number you're getting isn't an option. So sometimes there are situations where you can use either a percentage of brothers attending or number of brothers attending, depending on what gives you more points. So there are a few different options you can calculate things, and those items will specifically list that. But the number you need should be available in the box, but please let me know if you find an error on the form. It also talks about the deadlines, how to electronically submit the form, and has my contact information directly. You may think this is comical, but I am not the central office, and I am not at the central office. It's totally separate. I get calls every year asking me my hours or how late I'm going to be open on May 15th in case they have problems, and this is my home address and my personal cell phone number. I am more than happy to help you, but if you think you're calling the central office, you're not. I'm in Minnesota, they're in Texas. Okay, so now I'm going to show you that sheet 2 on the bottom. That's going to pop up, and you're going to have an opportunity to list the brothers that have qualified for getting you points through the form and what activities or what areas they earned you points for. Many chapters will pass this around or create a Google document out of this and have the individual brothers responsible for filling this out, or they'll task certain committees or certain brothers with reaching out to maybe 10 other brothers to gather this information. What organizations are they in? Do they hold any offices? In smaller schools, this can be really easy. Some of our chapters that are pushing 300 brothers, this is extremely time-consuming, and it's really important that you've got a team of people working on this together. It will be very difficult for one person to track down all this information on an individual, each individual brother. Okay, so if we're scrolling down through the form, there are several sections, and section 1 here is membership. This is extremely important. Line 2 here, which is sort of cut off on the left hand of your screen, but I've got it boxed in blue. This is the number of brothers, active brothers, as of February 15th, 2017. This goes back to that roster issue with eligibility I was talking about. This number that you put in for your active brothers as of February 15th is the number you're going to use as the number of brothers in your chapter for all of the percentage calculations through this form. And it's like, well, we're pledging people the next week. How do we know how many active brothers? There's people graduating, there's people pledging all the time. We just have to pick a date and time and say that's your number, and because we have some documentation of this number through the central office, it is your roster number from your dues assessment on the 15th. That has to match. I get that number from the central office, and that number needs to match. If the central office has 30 brothers and you're telling me you have 60 brothers, that's going to be a problem because the calculations are going to be way off through the form. So please take the effort to make sure that number matches what I'm going to be getting from the central office. Don't eliminate your PharmD 4 or fourth year brothers that are on rotation. Don't take those out. Everybody needs to include all active brothers that they are paying dues assessments for to the central office. Okay. Now I'm going to go through a couple of the big ticket new items on the form for those 30% of people that are repeaters. Here are a couple things that have changed on the form that are really important for you to know. So Historically, in Section 3, which is participation in province and national CAPASI meetings, number 21 is Grand Council Convention delegate. And on a GCC year, you can get 1,000 points for having a delegate at GCC. On a non-GCC year, this is set to 0. However, we now have the Leadership Symposium that took place for the first time this past year in 2016, and the Executive Committee has made the decision, along with the Chapter Awards Committee, that participation in the Leadership Symposium is extremely important. And so if your chapter was represented at the Leadership Symposium, you will get 1,000 points this year as well. So this will be a rotating item. We hope that this can continue, that 1 year will be a GCC delegate, the next year will be the Leadership Symposium, and that's 1,000 points. So that is the largest ticket item on this form. So huge motivation to get your chapter represented at these national opportunities that we are so fortunate to have provided to us within the fraternity. Another new thing this year you may remember is the GCD Faculty Advisor Verification Form, where you needed to have someone within your school signing off on who your supervisor was essentially within your chapter, your GCD or your faculty advisor. The schools need to know and be aware of who's responsible for the chapter. So this actually is in the optional bonus section for this year, which generally it has suggestions for the future and some donations and things, but this is a big item and it's not to be ignored because it's in the bonus section, but most chapters actually did this. So this is a good way to get your 500 points when you took the time to get this form signed. So make sure you're paying attention to the optional bonus section. There's some big ticket items in there as well. Yes, 1,000 points, 500 points. That's 1,500 points out of a total of like 12 to 13,000. So a lot of points just within those two items. Okay, here are some common things that I need to query chapters on that get missed in the process. So under Section 2, which is the Organization and Administration section, we ask about your public website that has been updated in the past year and is linked to the international website. And the last few years we had some issues with the linking on that website, and so that was not included as a verification criteria. But as our website has been working much better and is hugely improved, we're hoping that we'll be able to have that as a verifiable item as well. However, we would really appreciate you giving us your chapter website address here. There's a line for you to put that, some red wording on the right side that reminds you to please put that website. It's a lot easier for us from verification purposes to do that. Each website is looked at by a member of the Chapter Awards Committee, and if there is any violation of the picture policy on that website, you will not get the points for having a website. So take another look at your pictures, make sure there's nothing inappropriate that would violate our picture policy. We will not give you points for having a web page if there are violations on there. Risk management is far more important than getting 50 points on this form. It also needs to be updated in the past year, and so please make sure you've got current officers, current events. If this is a website with officers from 3 years ago, you're not going to be awarded those points, so that is a verifiable item. Section 6, the Scholarship and Awards section. Item 47 talks about making a donation to the CAPASI Foundation. We ask you for the name of the brother making the donation if it's on behalf of the chapter, or the name on the credit card used. So we're finding what happens is sometimes we're able to link an electronic donation to a specific chapter name, but other times it comes through based on the credit card that the donation was put on. And oftentimes this is someone's personal card or someone's parent's card or someone's husband's card or someone's card that has their legal name on it that's not the same as the name of the person that was put in this form. So please make sure it's the name on the credit card used and the brother's name. Put as much information in there as you can to help us. This will be another situation where Brother Resetter, the treasurer for the foundation, will provide me with information, and if we can't find a matching name, we start querying you as to what name could this possibly have been under so that we can get you your 100 points. We do have questions about using Amazon Smile, like, oh, we have some brothers that use Amazon Smile, so we're donating to the foundation. Amazon Smile, although we encourage it highly, in fact, I think my husband probably is responsible alone for 50% of the donations to the foundation with our Amazon use at our home. I definitely want to encourage you to use Amazon Smile, but that does not count as a Kappa Psi Foundation donation on behalf of your chapter. You actually need to make a separate, at least one-time financial obligation, financial donation to the Kappa Psi Foundation. Super important to support that. I'm sure there are scholarship winners on this webinar, and we need to continue to put money towards that great cause. And lastly, with the common missing information, section 10, correspondence and graduate relations asks about newsletter. You can get 50 points per issue, up to 2 issues, and you have to include those newsletters for me so that I can see that you've actually published 2 newsletters during the reporting period. A Word document of your MASC article is not a newsletter. Even if you're mailing your MASC article out separately, this needs to be like a publisher-based or longer document in an actual newsletter format with, you know, generally multiple contributors to be able to count. Most submissions we get are just fine unless they are the MASC submission, MASC article submission that are resent as a newsletter. You already get points for the MASC articles, which is why we don't use that in this section. So make sure you remember to attach those electronic newsletters on to the email when you submit your form. Okay, now we're going to shift gears to a few common questions that I get, and there are too many questions to be able to report all of them, but the most common things that I get are in section 6, the scholarship and awards, item number 44, which is the National Scholarship Honors Certificates. These are processed by the GCD, and many times you have no idea how many brothers got that. The good news is that process comes through the Chapter Awards Committee as well, so I have all the information from last year, 2016. So if you don't know that number, that's totally fine. Most chapters just email me and say, I don't know this number, and I either tell you the number or I say, just put that in the email, the submission. That's a verifiable item, so even if you don't fill that out, if your GCD sent those in, I will give you those points. So I will add those points if it's left blank because you didn't know that you'd had them or not, or I will verify them to make sure that the number that you've put in there is correct. We also have a lot of questions in section 7 about participation in pharmacy organizations. And there is one item that specifically talks about APHA membership, but the rest of the items talk about local, regional, or national pharmacy organizations. Any local or state pharmacy organization, whether it's managed care, hospital care, community pharmacy, any local, state, any regional, any national pharmacy organization is acceptable for these items. It doesn't have to be one of the 3 examples listed there. It says etc. on there, but oftentimes people will confirm with me that a certain organization would count in a certain area, and I'm happy to confirm that for you. But generally speaking, we're not going to be restrictive on that. And then lastly, a lot of questions in section 8 about participation in professional activities. So there is a community service philanthropy section, and it talks about both one-time activities and continuous activities. Many of our chapters do a lot of philanthropic activities and community service events. Many of you could earn far more than 2,000 points, but we have a maximum on this form of 2,000 points. So you can select all one-time activities, you could select all continuous activities. A continuous activity is one where you've done at least 3 times a year. So let's say you work with your local Ronald McDonald House and you make dinner for them twice each semester. So you're there 4 times. So that would be a continuous activity where you would get 400 points for that. You cannot get 800 points above by listing each individual Ronald McDonald House activity up above if it's more than 3. So it caps at 3. If you exceed 2,000 points in these drop-down menus, this true will turn to false. If your form says false when I get it, you will have it returned so that you can fix that area and only give me 2,000 points. It would be rare that I would eliminate a philanthropy project on verification. It would have to be something very weird, and I would definitely have contacted your chapter and says, it looks like this is duplicated. Can you explain to me what happened with these different projects? And we'll work through it. I'm not going to be taking points away that you don't know about in this section. So please make sure you don't exceed 2,000 here. It's not going to get you anywhere. You're going to get the form back and you're going to have to fix it. So save yourself some time and don't bother to put extra in there. That it's very good that you do that, but it doesn't work for the process if we're overclaiming points in this section. There's some questions about community service and philanthropy. The question often is, if you donate money to something, the Red Cross, just send them $200 from your chapter, is that community service or philanthropy? And the answer is probably yes. Generally, philanthropy would imply a very generous donation of money or the addition of some sort of service along with that donation to really serve persons or contribute to humanistic efforts. So like giving a man a fish versus teaching a man to fish. Philanthropy is more teaching a man to fish. So it implies that there's some sort of action in there. However, we leave the definitions of what you can claim for community service and philanthropy projects very vague at this time. Different chapters have different numbers of brothers. They have different resources for how to provide community service or philanthropy projects. Some 6-year programs have undergraduate members that are not in the professional program yet that can't participate in brown bag events for the first couple of years of their time in Kappa Psi, as opposed to 4-year professional programs where you could participate. So we have not put a lot of restrictions on those to date. However, it is a very hot area of discussion within the chapter awards process, is should we be having a separation between community service and professionally driven projects that are pharmacy based or healthcare based. So for now, this is very loose. If you have a specific question about if something would count or not, please let me know. One thing we've had come up recently in the last couple of years is an individual brother who is running a race of some sort and is raising money, not on behalf of Kappa Psi, but happens to be a Kappa Psi brother, or some Kappa Psi brothers are donating to that. That probably isn't a chapter community service project or philanthropic effort unless they're doing some large fundraising event toward that brother who's representing them running. So I'm more than happy to help answer questions about those individual situations that happen in your chapter, but we do have that pretty loosely based right now because we know you're exposed to a different variety of opportunities depending on where you're at and the size of your chapter. Okay, a reminder, if this says false, you're going to get your form back. Okay, so now it's time to submit your form when you get done. You are going to email the documents to me. That is my email, and the documents I need are your chapter progress report form, and you'll put your chapter name with the _17. So epsilon _17, beta epsilon _17. If you send it to me named chapter name 17, then I'm going to have to hopefully notice that and rename it, or we're going to have a lost form, especially if you haven't filled out that very first section of chapter name. And please include the province on there too. That's really helpful. Also make sure you've completed sheet 2. Some people with really large chapters have a hard time doing sheet 2, and I'm perfectly happy to get that information in a different format if that's easier for your chapter. Just make sure that you have that list of brothers and their activities for verification purposes attached to that submission. Also remember, if you took points for those newsletters, you need to have those attached as well. If they're not there, I will query you and say, hey, it looks like you forgot your newsletters. Please get them to me by X time. Now, most importantly, don't forget to ensure that you are eligible. This little finger with the ribbon, the reminder, you can't be #1 or a top performer if you owe money to the central office or if your taxes are not filed. You have to be keeping up with your chapter responsibilities and financial obligations in order to be eligible for these awards. So please don't put in all the time to get this information collected and then end up disqualified at the end because of a financial oversight issue or a tax issue. Remember, I told you there were 4 different documents that we needed. We've talked about the chapter progress report form instruction letter and the chapter progress report form. Now I want to take a minute about the dean's evaluation and the GCD evaluation. These 2 documents you are going to need to print out and bring to your dean or bring to your GCD. And I would recommend making an appointment with your dean for 5 or 10 minutes of their time and going through the form with them and walking out of the dean's office with the form in a sealed envelope, or you can bring it to your dean's office and they can fill it out and mail it directly to me too, whatever works best for your chapter. But I always like to see it in my hand and know that that's been taken care of. The forms look like this. The dean's evaluation has 4 items that the dean is looking at for you and is worth a total of 100 points. And the GCD evaluation is longer. I don't have the whole thing on this screenshot because it gets too small, but it is worth up to 400 points. So that is a very significant point total. This would also be a really good thing to talk over with your GCD to see how they feel that you're doing in goal setting as well. So I highly recommend that you use this as a communication means. If you have more than one GCD, you can have the GCDs work together to send in one document. That definitely would be preferred. I will say sometimes I will have more than one evaluation that's obviously been submitted independently by 2 different GCDs or 2 different advisors, and generally I alert each that the other has sent one and what the point totals are, and we figure out between all of us what would be the best score to give the chapter based on everyone's feedback instead of just taking the highest score or the lowest score that comes into me. But it's much better if that's done on your end and you're selecting the correct person that's the best to evaluate your chapter on these overall performance options that are listed. So when it's time to submit those, they're going to come to me in the mail, either directly from your dean and GCD, or they're being returned to your chapter, whoever is managing this process, and then put in the mail to me. Very important. I do not need these by April 15th in order to get the early bird bonus points. You only need to get me the chapter progress report form by April 15th. It's great if I have those other letters, then you've got everything taken care of and it's one less thing to worry about, but that will not affect your early bird bonus. These letters need to be postmarked on or before May 15th. So I'll have these trickling in even May 21st, May 22nd. That's fine. Please do not spend $20, $30 to overnight these to me. If there's an issue, if your dean is on vacation, something's going on, just please reach out and we can figure out a way that you're not spending inordinate amounts of money that you could be using on much more important things to your chapter than getting me a document by a certain date. Just reach out and we'll figure out what we need to do to make sure that you're able to get the points that you're entitled to. Do not reach out to me on May 20th and after the fact try to solve the problem. That's not going to work. We're going to need to be proactive on this, but I'm happy to work with you because situations do come up where we need to try to be flexible. But the general rule is we either have to have a plan or that has to be postmarked on or before May 15th or it will not be counted. Okay, so we're down to our last slide, our poll question here. And I want to know if anyone learned anything in this webinar that was new that's going to help them be able to complete or submit the chapter progress report form more successfully than if they didn't have access to this webinar opportunity. Okay, wonderful. 96% of you learned something new, and 4% must be somebody on my committee that's making sure that is keeping me honest here, maybe. This, I believe, is the last slide. Outside of my shameless plug that Kappa Psi is for life. I am many, many years out from my collegiate life and still very committed to this process and feel it's really important. for us to continue to give back as graduates. And I'm very happy to be able to be a part of this process, and I really want to help you. So please feel free to reach out, send me an email, or give me a call if you need help. I really try to get back to you as soon as possible, but remember, I have my real life too, and so I really try to get back to you within a day or two at the latest. If you haven't heard back in that time, please email me. I must have missed something, but I'm really happy to try to help troubleshoot with questions too. I don't want you struggling with this process. That's not what it's about. I'm hoping that we have the opportunity to maybe answer a few questions from people. If we have any. Oop, I see it may be a hand raised. If I understand how to work this properly, maybe Tyler Perry has a hand raised, and I'm going to unmute him, I think. Oh, maybe I can't.
You're unmuted, Tyler.
You're unmuted, Tyler.
Tyler, do you have a question? Maybe not. Karen, were there any other questions that came in? Oop, somebody has a question. DJ? Let me see here. And DJ's question looks like it's gone too. Okay, I'm getting a question. Can I explain cell 132? Let me see. Tyler, is there a specific question? Hold on here. I'm going to cell 132. Let me find it. Is this like line 132 on the Excel file, Tyler, I'm assuming, which is the International Philanthropic Project, perhaps? If it is, line 132 or question 62, this is under section 8, participation in professional activities. The International Philanthropic Project is announced generally every year or every 2 years, and I believe it is still the American Red Cross at this time. So if your chapter has made a donation to the American Red Cross, you would claim those 50 points for participation. I hope that answers that question, Tyler. And DJ has a question. For verification purposes, did you say that working in a community pharmacy counts in section 7? So no, working in a community pharmacy would not count. These are either holding offices in a pharmacy organization or being members in pharmacy organizations. So it counts if you are an officer in your state pharmacy, your state community pharmacy organization, or your state hospital pharmacy organization. So these are specific either memberships in organizations, national organizations, local, regional, or national officers, or attending the most recent meetings of those. So working in a pharmacy would not be included in this form. Working in a pharmacy would not count as involvement in the pharmacy organization. You would need to actually be a member of to take certain points or officers of to take other sets of points. Okay, I'm just going from the top to make sure that I haven't missed anything here. So Tyler wants clarification. What does participation consist of? Does donating to the Red Cross count, or is it some other fashion? That is totally up to the chapter. We have left that very loosely based. Most people have access to something within the Red Cross. Maybe there's opportunities for blood drives, or some people do like the cookie and juice at a blood drive, or some chapters don't have that opportunity, and so they make a flat donation to the Red Cross. So any participation within the Red Cross can count for that participation. And Anna K. has a great question. She wants to know, when we're talking about this participation in Pharmacy Association, Section 7, I'm guessing that she's talking about the meeting attendance. So this would be item 56 and 57 and 58, which corresponds to the Excel file lines 122, 123, 124. Do we add up the number of brothers attending the national meetings together? Like if you have some that went to APHA, some that went to ASHP, or do a separate for each meeting? And it's total. So basically, if I'm a brother in your chapter, Anna K, and I went to APHA and ASHP, I'm only going to count once, because it's the percentage of brothers that attended the most recent national meeting of something. So one brother can't be counted more than one time, or you could end up with more than 100% of your chapter attending. So each brother, have they attended a national meeting in the last year, yes or no? And that would be your total number that you put in there, so you could get the percentage of brothers in your chapter that attended a national meeting. I hope that answers that question. Okay. I have another question from Macy Llewellyn, and she wants to know, if we collaborate with alumni for a newsletter twice a year and the alumni pay for and distribute the newsletter, does this count for points? No, that does not count for points unless it is a newsletter of your chapter. This sounds to me like you provide a contribution for the graduate chapter or the alumni chapter newsletter versus your own chapter newsletter. You may want to send me a specific copy of what that looks like, and if it truly is a joint effort where there's a considerable amount of work put in by the chapter and that serves as your newsletter, I might see about what you could do to help with distribution of the newsletter, even if the alumni sponsors the payment for that, to have some more active involvement. But there could be some possibilities, but that might be something that I need to actually take a look at or work more closely with you, Macy. Okay, Tyler's happy with that answer. Now we have another question from Tyler. Question number 68, which correlates with cell 159. Okay, so this is in the social activities. It says our chapter sponsors a formal event during the school year. So this does not have to be like everybody dresses formally, but it just means that your chapter is sponsoring a event of some sort, whether or not that is a dinner or maybe a study hour for the first year pharmacy class during finals, or just some formal event. Most of the time when chapters are inquiring about this, it is a dinner. Maybe they have a dinner meeting each semester that's at a nicer place that they go out to, or a formal event that they hold within their school. So it doesn't have to be like you're in tuxedos, but there's some event that's different than normal pharmacy activities that is sponsored by Kappa Psi. Okay. So Joanna is asking for number 55. Let me scroll back there. Brothers from our chapter hold offices in pharmacy organizations. Local officers, regional officers, national officers. These would be brothers holding offices in non-Kappa Psi organizations. Yes, so your Kappa Psi officers would not be included in the local, regional, or national officers of a pharmacy organization. That would be outside of Kappa Psi. Thank you. Actually, I think we'll make a note to make that clarification on the form. That's a good question, Joanna. We'll put that on the list for next year. Missy from Zeta Gamma is asking if attendance to our State Board of Pharmacies meeting would count for number 57. And I would say number 57 is, for those of you who don't have the form right in front of you, is the percentage of brothers from our chapter attended the most recent State Pharmaceutical Association or State Pharmacy Organization meeting. I do not think the State Board of Pharmacy meeting would count for that. But that is a good question. Okay, I think I've caught up with my list of questions that have been submitted so far. Anyone else? No more hands raised. People are leaving. Well, before everyone goes, I would like to really take a minute to thank you guys for spending the time to listen about this webinar, and please spread the word to other people in your province that maybe didn't get on, that this will be available for them to listen to. And please, like I mentioned, don't hesitate to reach out if you have specific questions or are struggling on a certain item. I'm more than happy to try to save you time and answer that for you straight away.
Okay, looks like we have a here from DJ and Jason.
Okay, let's go back. Okay, DJ, what is the minimum amount of a donation to the foundation in order to earn the points? This is a very good question. At this time, there is not a specific minimum amount donation to the foundation. We have not felt comfortable putting a dollar value on that because different chapters have different financial means. I think it would be a very reasonable, there is nothing written down, DJ or anyone else that's listening, but I would think that a $25 minimum amount donation to the foundation would be probably the lowest acceptable, but we have accepted all donations to date in any dollar amount. Okay, another question from Jason, specifically about that 56, 57, 58, which talks about attendance at the most recent regional meeting or most recent state meeting or national meeting. It doesn't necessarily have to be the most recent, because I know there are some state or regional meetings that happen more than once a year. So if, I think it's appropriate that if it's within the 1-year reporting period that they have attended a regional meeting or a state meeting or a national meeting, it would be appropriate to count that. That actually is a good point brought up, and it might be reasonable to just say has attended a meeting in the reporting period moving forward to be less confusing. Thanks for the good question. Okay, I think we're caught back up on questions, so if anyone else wants to jump in, you're first in line. Any more? Okay, well, I think that we have reached the end of our time together tonight. Thank you very much for your participation with these great questions. I've already got a couple ideas jotted down here for modifications to the wording to make things more clear for you guys moving forward with next year's form. This form will not be changed, so it's okay if you keep working on it. Thanks again for taking the time. This is really important to be able to bring this back to your chapters, and I'm happy to continue to help you in any way that I can. And with that, we will wrap up and sign off, and thank you very much for your attention.